When I was in college, during the study week before finals, you would find me in one of two places. Either in the computer room writing my papers, we didn't have personal PCs back then, or in the game room, dropping quarters into the video game machines. There were three friends who really got me through finals: Ms. Pac-Man, Spy Hunter, and Centipede. Only in the game room could I momentarily push aside the pressures that life was giving me. And even though I was good at racking up extended play, whenever the games ended, those papers still needed to be written. And as much as I wanted to, I couldn't duck the reality I had to face. Well, these past few weeks, as I faced sermon writing, the rabbinic version of college finals, I tried again to get lost in my iPhone games, battling virus wars, engaging in space battles instead of doing what I should have been doing, editing my sermons. However, don't worry, Michelle edited them, got rid of it, cut them down. Okay. However, the games might have captured my attention, but when it was over, I still had to deal with those approaching sermon deadlines. It reminded me of that time I was walking by a group of teens who were playing one of those first-person shooter games, which allow players to experience the action through the eyes of the protagonist. They see their hands in front of them, aiming and shooting the gun, holding off the enemies, or sometimes just running rampant through the crowds. Now, these aren't my kind of games, because that violence is not my cup of tea. But it got me to thinking. I realized that these first-person things, they're really, not the violence part, but they're kind of really Jewish. I mean, think about it. There's a whole body of Jewish literature called Midrash. It's rabbinic interpretation. What is Midrash? If not a rabbinic attempt to get into the mind of our biblical ancestors, to see the world through their eyes, to try to understand what way back when they were thinking and feeling. In fact, all of you participate in one of those. The Passover Seder is a first-person Midrash experience. It says, "B'chol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo, ke'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim." In each and every generation, every person must see themselves as if they went forth from Egypt. In other words, see the world through the eyes of another, and your mind and heart will soften. Much has been written about the Exodus from Egypt through Moses and Miriam's eyes. I wonder, however, with the Torah's focus on the vulnerable, what would it be like to see through the eyes of the forgotten people in Torah? Like the people left behind when Noah's ark took off as the world was being flooded, or the Israelite slaves being whipped by their taskmasters. I just got an idea. Jewish first-person video games. We totally have to make those. Who's in? Any investors? Let's go, we'll make it. But so, anyways, I'm shifting back. That was such a good one in my head, but it didn't work on the paper. Then I shifted back to the first-person shooter games. What would it be like playing those games if we similarly switch perspective? Imagine that instead of being the first-person shooter, we became the ones being shot at, the ones whose world was being destroyed. But I didn't have to imagine too much, because I've already seen this play out. Only it wasn't a game. Last November, I woke in the middle of the night, as I often do, and I picked up my smartphone, as I often foolishly do. And on Facebook there, I saw that there had been a shooting at the borderline country western dance bar in Thousand Oaks. I immediately knew that our congregant, Ben Ginsberg, an avid country music line dancer, must have been there. Scrolling through, I discovered that Ben had been there. He dodged the bullets and had narrowly escaped. Ben lived, while 13 innocent people did not. And in the days that followed, Ben told us in great detail what happened. It was as if instead of playing a first-person shooter, I was seeing the shooting through the eyes of someone being shot at. Except it wasn't a game. It involved a kid, my kid. I bar mitzvahed Ben. I confirmed him at the temple. And as it turns out, following the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting the previous week or so, I sat with him to reassure him that, and I quote, "The chances are so slim that you will ever find yourself facing such a shooting." But the borderline shooting happened days later, and he was there. That could have been any of our kids. And to think that one of ours came so close to dying because of some rage-filled maniac went on a murder spree. See through the eyes of another, and your mind and heart will soften. It made me wonder how Jewish tradition spoke about this. I remembered Exodus chapter 22, verse 8. When you build a new house, you shall make a parapet, a low protective fence for your roof, so that you do not bring blood guilt upon your house should anyone fall from it. It's like this. Back in those days, they had many flat roof houses, and people would go up, friends and family, and hang out. Maybe they'd barbecue, and when it was hot, they'd sleep out there at night. So Torah elucidated a simple principle. We should anticipate the danger and build a railing so no one falls and gets hurt, or worse, dies. Torah is teaching us that we are obligated as Jews and as human beings to act precipitously and proactively against the dangers we know about or can readily and reasonably imagine. I wanted to delve more into that, but unfortunately I didn't have time because less than 16 hours later, a new threat emerged. I watched on first-person videos as the flames of destruction raced through the neighborhoods of our synagogue and surrounding, forcing nearly 80% of our congregants into mandatory evacuation. As the fires claimed acre after acre, volunteers from Orami and my colleagues from around the country called our Orami congregants, some 4 times, to check in on how people were doing, to offer rooms and places to go, and as Rabbi Julia talked about last Rosh Hashanah, to announce our kids' camp and adult hangout at D. Toledo High School. Through the eyes of many of you here, in fact, I gained a first-person perspective on the flight from the fires, hearing about your fears, your exhaustion, and your worries. Now, some people pass time in hotels, others with grandparents and other relatives. But too many watch the fires approach their homes, raging through the underbrush, racing up hills until, fleeing just ahead of the flames, they learned from people who stayed behind or via the news what the fires did to their home. Unlike the burning bush that burned and miraculously was not consumed, their homes burned and were consumed. Unlike God's voice that called out to Moses, God's voice did not call out to them. They only heard the sounds of roofs and walls and precious keepsakes burning into dust and ashes. See through the eyes of another, and your heart and mind will soften. I needed God's voice, so I turned again to Torah. And in chapter 21, I heard God whispering to me, to us, quote, "When a person opens a pit, or when a person digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey fall into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution." It's like this. If you open up a pit on your land, or there is one, you got to cover it. If there are dangers created either by our actions or our inactions, they should not be allowed to fester. We have a duty to confront these dangers. Torah teaches that if someone gets hurt or property gets damaged because we don't deal with it, we are liable. Our neighborhood shootings and these wildfires are occurring with a frequency and intensity that we haven't seen in generations. These are the symptoms of a world crying out to us to pay attention and take action. And as much as we might want to throw coins into the video game or flee to whatever is our preferred diversion, it's always the same. From this reality, there is no escape. When we return, the danger persists. How many of you took note, really thought about the metal detectors at the theater doors this morning? The Kavli Theater decided that to keep their patrons somewhat safer, they needed metal detectors. Similarly, synagogues around the nation are devoting an increasing share of their budgets to security. And yet I'm not sure any of this will really make us any safer than before, alone. How many of you noticed that our homeowners insurance is going up, even if you didn't live directly in the fire area or heard that it will, or that the insurance coverage for smoke damage is most likely to be capped at a very low figure? The insurance industry, a business of statistics and algorithms, has determined that major rate hikes will be necessary to offset the payouts that their business models project they will need to make in the future to those of us in wildfire areas and to others in the flood zones down by the Gulf states and in the hurricane areas in the southeast and up the coast. Because their algorithms show that these patterns will continue. A few years ago, Moody's, that's an international company that determines bond ratings, how much cities and states the rate they can borrow money. They sent warning letters to cities and states explaining that because of increased wildfires and flooding and hurricanes, those cities and states had to quickly develop responsible plans to address the dangers posed by climate, or their bond rating would be lowered. No matter what we may believe or not about climate issues, the financial risk market has determined that these changes now and in the future are real and pervasive. So it's like Moody's said to cities and states, you gotta deal with this, and if you don't, you're gonna pay. That is a modern extension of Torah's admonition that we must address the dangers of the uncovered pit and the unfenced roof. The lessons of Mount Sinai are calling out to us today. I looked in Deuteronomy and happened upon these verses, V'haya im Shemoah. It's become a prayer, it's long been a prayer in the traditional prayer book, which said that if we don't follow God's Torah, then the rains will cease to fall and the produce of our fields will decrease dramatically. Now, the early Reform rabbis were very uncomfortable with this theology that suggested that rainfall would be affected and produce would be minimized by whether or not we kept kosher or followed Shabbat. In fact, they pulled that from the prayer book 100 years ago. But today, as we face severe storms that batter us and fierce flooding that devastates, diabolical fires raging uncontrollably, and mass shootings week after week, perhaps we might turn to Deuteronomy again to re-examine the connection between our actions and our world. And it's not about kashrut, and it's not about Shabbat. Rabbi Richard Levy, my teacher, may his memory be for a blessing, the Reform movement's preeminent liturgist, reinterpreted that traditional prayer with this new connection in mind. It's in our prayer book back at the synagogue on Shabbat. I'd like you to pray it with me. It's up on the screen. Together. If you hear the words from Sinai, then love will flow from us, and we shall serve all that is holy with all our intellect and passion and all our life. If we can serve all that is holy, there will be enough. But if we turn from Sinai's words and serve only what is common and profane, making gods of our own comfort or power, then the holiness of life will contract for us. Our world will grow inhospitable. Let us therefore lace these words into our passion and our intellect, and bind them as a sign upon our hands and eyes. Let us write them in the doorposts upon our house, and teach them to our children. Let us honor the generations that came before us, keeping the promise. Friends, the world is crying out to us. Our children are crying out to us, and it's time for our minds and hearts, softened by this past year's experiences, to lead us to act. You remember the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, the one that was shot up last November? I just learned that it happened 1 year ago, but they are still shuttered and closed. They can't move on, and neither should we. The burden we have placed on the next generation's shoulders is overwhelming them. Our own 12th grader, Allison Pine, told her rabbis and then told her congressperson last winter, "I was 8 years old when I endured my first lockdown drill, hearing the announcement that an active shooter was intruding on my school. I remember running to the rainbow carpet to protect myself from a made-up scenario. I remember feeling my heart racing at the thought of a stranger murdering my peers and me. Years have passed," she writes, "but I remain the same. The thought of being violated with bullets still haunts my mind. I look out my classroom window every time someone walks by, feeling that the next time someone will kill me and my peers." In response to the kids and the adults who are getting shot at in dance bars and in school classrooms, at concerts and in malls, in mosques, in churches, in synagogues, a startling 85% of you nationally say there's a simple first step. We should require a background check for gun purchases and gun ownerships. Others point to addressing mental health issues, removing weapons from people with mental illness, limiting access to specific weapons, closing gun show loopholes, or more vigorously enforcing the laws we already have on the books. It seems to me that each of these ideas is part of the solution. So, heeding Torah, I invite you to pick one or two and get out there and advocate. Don't sit back. Get out. Do something. Make it happen. Do it now. Did you know that it recently flooded again in Houston? They went through so much, and now again. And the hurricanes up the East Coast keep intensifying. Did you know that in these past 5 years, because of nearby wildfires, we have evacuated the Torah scrolls from Orami 4 times? And that major corporations worldwide are moving toward reality-based business models, factoring in these changes that are increasingly affecting their ability to do business, or that our young people are pleading with us adults to take seriously our responsibility as guardians of their future. They want all adults, whatever we believe about the origins of these extremes in climate, to take action. These kids are living through devastating wildfires and floods and hurricanes, seeing the destruction with their own eyes, and they are frightened for their future. They are demanding that we get real. So, heeding God's call, let's cover up that pit. Make your next car a hybrid or an electric model. Move towards solar energy. Reduce your red meat consumption. Go beyond those plastic straws to reduce your dependence on all single-use plastics. Choose something that resonates you, or a couple of things or more, but take some serious actions. Let's do it now. My friends, we are digging ourselves into a pit, and the Midrash has something to say. The Midrash teaches that when God created Adam and Eve, God led them through the Garden of Eden, and God said to them, "See how beautiful and praiseworthy are all my works. Everything I've created for your sake. But remember this, don't ruin my world. For if you do, there will be no one to fix it after you. When we see the world through the eyes of another, our minds and hearts must soften. Friends, this has been a very difficult year. Tree of Life synagogue shooting, borderline bar shooting, raging fires in all our neighborhoods, the shooting at the Poway synagogue down south, just to name a few. And now it's Yom Kippur, a time for self-reflection. Yom Kippur asks, have we done enough to make the world safer for us and our children? Yom Kippur is calling out to us, asking if we have addressed the problem of the unfenced roof and the uncovered pit. Friends, we've got work to do. Let's get started.